Okay, so we're now kind of, for me personally, beginning the process of the return of Sabretooth. And let me explain, because for the character of Sabretooth, as we all know by this point in Marvel Comics, for Charles Xavier, he had truly believed that he could change the mind of Sabretooth, turn the man into a better person. And so for a good while there, for Sabretooth, he was staying with the X-Men. Now, technically, everything that Charles was doing was not really working, but on top of that, you had Wolverine stab the mind of Sabretooth, which kind of turned him into a different type of character because of the brain damage. So right now for Sabretooth, he's acting more like an animal pet. But as his mind slowly heals up, we're getting closer and closer to the return of good old-fashioned Sabretooth. But here's the thing, because for me personally, I kind of feel like what Gambit does in this issue alone is kind of the reason why we get the return of Sabretooth. And you see what I mean as we go through this particular issue. But this issue does pick up after you had Rogue officially leave the X-Men. So we're kind of getting into that era where we're going to see different people be put on the X-Men to replace some X-Men members as they leave the team. So for Rogue, with her leaving, we could technically say that Cannonball is her replacement. Now, that being said, for Gambit, he knows the reason why Rogue left, because when it came to Gambit and Rogue, they had kissed because they had believed the entire universe was going to die thanks to the character better known as Legion. Now, as we all know, that storyline led into Age of Apocalypse. But either way, you had Bishop being able to technically save the entire universe. So that kiss was somewhat important, but technically pointless. With Rogue kissing Gambit, it allowed her to look into his mind. And so she had absorbed a lot of things he had locked away in his mind, some very dark secrets. So because of those dark secrets, it made her run away. And so for Gambit, for the time being, it's just him wanting to be alone, because now he knows his dark secrets are basically coming out slowly. And sooner or later, the entire X-Men are going to know what's going on with Gambit. Now, with all that being said, you do have Storm come to Gambit, because for Storm and Gambit, they're like best friends. It was Storm who brought Gambit into the X-Men. And so it's her making sure that her friend is okay. Now, for Gambit, he wants to be left alone, but he also kind of realized that Storm is also going through a few things as well, because back in the G Nation storyline, when it came to Storm, she had no choice. She had to go ahead and kill off the character known as Meryl to save the lives of innocent people. And so for Storm, she's not really used to the idea of taking people's lives unless she really has to. And so she was kind of hoping to find a way to not do it. But as we all know, unfortunately, she had no choice. But you do have the two characters kind of re-establish that close bond they have with one another and wanting to be there for one another with what they're going through. But now we have to switch over to the World Health Organization, better known as WHO. And the reason why, because we pick up with Charles, Xavier, and Beast having a meeting with those people about the legacy virus. I just realized that it has technically been a short period of time where we have not talked about the legacy virus. There was a point where almost every single video I had to mention the legacy virus. But either way, back in X-Men Prime, you had Trish Tilby tell the entire world about the legacy virus. And of course, you had people just freaking out left and right, because originally this virus was only going after mutants. And that was really it until Moira McTaggart, a human who had gotten the legacy virus. And so right now for Trish Tilby, with her telling the entire world, you have everyone wondering if they should freak out. Now for Charles, Xavier, and Beast, they're trying their best to keep everyone calm by technically lying, like saying like, hey, listen, yes, there is this brand new virus, but at the same time, there's only been like 8 to 9 cases. 8 of those cases belongs to mutants and 1 belongs to a human. And so we really have no actual reason to freak out just yet. But then you have Renee Machcomb, and I really hope I pronounced that last name correctly, get out of her chair and bring up Genosha. We had saw Renee back in Cable issue number 23. Now, for Renee, she left Genosha to come over to America to express her concerns about the legacy virus. And so she is technically very upset with Charles Xavier because right now he's trying to downplay the whole idea of the virus by saying like, yeah, guys, listen, there was 300 cases over in Genosha because at that point in time, the X-Men had just helped the country out by allowing mutants to be free in that country, but then out of nowhere, they all got sick. But they had assumed it was because of the legacy virus. It's Charles saying, what if we are completely wrong? What if it's not the legacy virus? Because there was an entire process that y'all used back in Genosha to force mutants to become slaves. What if that process gave them a new kind of virus that only affects them? Because again, they're from Genosha. It's Charles on his best to lie about the actual cases or number of cases of the legacy virus. Now, while this meeting is going on, you have Excalibur watching this meeting, especially because of Moira Taggart, because she's the only human right now who has the virus. Now, for Excalibur, they kind of believe that for this virus, it's no longer really acting like a virus. Instead, it's acting like a designer gene, meaning that it was engineered to do a very particular goal for somebody who had made the virus. And so for Moira Taggart, she believes that yes, the legacy virus is a virus, but not really. It was designed to do one particular goal, which seems like wiping out the mutant race or possibly the entire Earth. But as we jump back over to the school of Charles Xavier, we get reminded that there was Boom Boom, who was the only X character who was trying her best to take care of Sabretooth. Out of all the other X characters, they're kind of like, we'll keep our distance. But for Boom Boom, she felt bad for him because when she looks at him, she sees a man who's kind of lost in his mind, who's acting like a pet right now. And so she's trying her best to kind of hopefully see him turn into a better person and kind of remove away from this whole idea of acting like a pet, really. And so she gets very upset by it. Now, this leads into X-Force number 48 that we're going to cover very soon on the channel. But right after you have Boom Boom leave, you then have Gambit arrive in the danger room with Sabretooth. And the reason why, because for Gambit, there is a huge connection between these two characters. Now, we do know one of the connections, but there's more between them that we have not officially learned just yet. But for Gambit, he wants to make sure that Sabretooth never does forget about his past. But while you have Sabretooth kind of going through Gambit's process, back in San Francisco, you have Beast he begins to hate the idea of what they just did. You know, the idea of lying at how big the legacy virus truly is. Now, he does meet up with Charles Xavier, and we're seeing Charles Xavier right now feeling powerless because now he's beginning to doubt himself once again. Now, we have seen this before in the earlier parts of our coverage over the X-Men, but this is a tad bit different. And let me explain, because for Charles Xavier, he's kind of doubting the idea of trying to bring in Sabretooth, but also how to handle the legacy virus. He kind of feels like he's playing with fire. Now for Beast, he does tell Charles like, hey, you're overreacting. But this conversation does kind of lead into a different angle. But first, we have to go ahead and jump back over to Gambit. Because for Gambit, what he is trying to do at the moment is to make Sabretooth relive all the different moments where he had killed people for no actual good reason, just mindless killing. It's him saying like, you killed off this person and this person and this person for no good reason. Now for Sabretooth, because currently right now his mind is more of like, you know, oh, house pet or an innocent person, he hates the idea of what he's seeing at the moment, seeing all of these different images of people that he had hurt. But as Gambit is saying, no matter how you evolved into a better person, no matter how hard you try to get away from your past, I'm going to be there to remind you of every single thing that you have done wrong in this world. Now Storm comes in and she's like, hey, stop all of this mess. And Gambit does. But before he does leave, he makes sure that Sabretooth goes right back in the cage and he walks away. But to close on today's video, we jump back over to that conversation between Beast and Charles Xavier. And I love the ending to this book because for Charles Xavier, it's him wondering like, what makes Sabretooth tick? Is it a whole idea that because he's a mutant, was his mutation the reason why he became a killer? Or possibly his behavior? Now for Beast, he kind of does play with the idea of like, yeah, we could say it is genetics because, hey, you know what? Look at Wolverine. Like, Wolverine is slowly turning into a savage character. But at the same time, though, can we actually use that as an excuse? What if it's because of his behavior? Because for Sabretooth, he loves what he does. He loves the idea of killing people. That's more behavior rather than genetics. But also it's him saying like the X-Men are not trying to excuse the past of Sabretooth. Their main goal is to help him become a better person, but also make him remember that you were a horrible person in your past. And so for Beast, he's saying, if Sabretooth is pure evil, that makes us pure good. But at the same time, we got to make sure that with him being pure evil, he does not change our behavior at all. Make sure we stay on the right path. Now for Beast, it's not really him saying like the X-Men are just good people and that is it. No, but when you sit down and compare yourself to Sabretooth, then technically you are a pure good person. And for Charles Xavier, he needed to hear that. But the book ends on that note right there. So guys, see y'all the next X-Men or next comic book video. Later, guys.